He embodied the ideal of a decent action hero. She was the voice of the famous musician who, on video, rescued a drowning youngster. One of Hollywood's most underappreciated love stories was that of Robert Urich and Heather Menzies. The way it concluded, however, remains a mystery. Their world was shattered by the cancer, the consecutive catastrophes, the dying that took place precisely 15 years after that. Simultaneously, these were not just coincidences, even down to the minute. Almost unbelievably brutal is what truly transpired between Robert and Heather. They claimed that with 15 different programs, Robert Urich had more television appearances than any other starring man in history. If it were the only thing in his narrative, he would be a legend. His seamless transition from action star to dramatic lead left audiences in awe. After that, to a famous Broadway performer, and last, to a revered documentary presenter. Many performers find themselves confined. Every mold was broken by Robert. He hails from Ohio and got his start as a football player. Just natural ability, charisma, and a close friend in Burt Reynolds. No ritzy connections whatsoever. He got his first big break with Burt's early belief in him. It was 1975 when SW8 released That Shot. Robert portrayed the likable but gruff police officer Jim Street. The performance was brief. Even though it was axed in 1976 due to excessive violence, millions of homes still saw his face on screen. Out of nowhere, he went from being a promising young man to a future superstar. Next up was Vega. From 1978 through 1981, Robert portrayed the role of Dan Tana, a hip private investigator based in Sin City. More than that, it was a watershed moment in popular culture. The neon-lit streets were navigated by him in a 1957 Ford Thunderbird, a fiery crimson, solving crimes while dressed sarcastically. Just so you know, the pilot's yellow Corvette caught fire, so that was the replacement. Similar to Robert, that crimson T-Bird became famous. He was nominated for 2 Golden Globes for the performance. Above all else, it elevated him to the status of a symbol, smart, articulate, and polished. A primetime drama star, he was for a time. Still, Urich wasn't done yet. In the 3 decades that followed, he became television's undisputed ruler. 15 dramatic roles spanning all musical styles. In his soap opera role, he played a tennis pro who was completely out of his depth. He worked on espionage cases in Gavilan. The Lazarus Man, a Western set in the mid-1990s, featured him as the lead. He appeared in nearly every film and television show from 1973 until 2001. He wasn't merely coasting, either. He was never afraid to attempt something new, shift gears, or take a chance. He wasn't satisfied with just being a famous actor. It was all he wanted to do. Then the hired man Spenser showed up. There was more to this than meets the eye. It was an operation from 1985 to 1988 and generated around $50 million for Massachusetts. That is the price tag for filming in Boston, which is where the show's gritty, real vibe was born. Cold snaps were common. Robert was able to make do with very little funding. As the enigmatic and tough Hawk, his co-star Avery Brooks, and he had incredible chemistry. Gunfights and automobile chases weren't the point of the show. It pertained to moral fiber, fairness, and perseverance in the face of adversity. Audiences adored it. He reprised his role as Spenser in 4 made-for-TV films, demonstrating that both Robert and the character had lasting appeal. However, he pulled a fast one right when everyone believed they understood him. The National Geographic Explorer brand adopted him. The show, which he presented from 1988 until 1995, moved about between TBS, CNBC, and MSNBC. When he spoke about the secrets of the ocean and long-gone cultures, his voice became one of awe-inspiring awe. He truly meant it, not only acting out a script. For his narration of U-Boat's terror on our shores, he was honored with a 1993 Cable Ace Award and a 1992 Emmy. Another Cable Ace went to him for hosting on assignment. None of these gigs were casual. These shows were important and well-respected. Robert proved he possessed the necessary range. He could have ended his legend-making career there. However, an additional act remained. Robert made his Broadway debut in 2000 while he was suffering synovial cell sarcoma. an aggressive and uncommon disease he had been treating since 1996. From January 5th until February 13th, he was Billy Flynn in Chicago. Although he had performed the part in smaller venues such as Detroit and Washington, D.C., this was his big break. He was spot on at the Schubert Theater. His ability to sing, really sing, and his performance both astonished and amazed the audience. Plus, another item emerged. His wife remarked afterwards that he appeared to have a mischievous glint in his eye when he took the stage. He was infectiously charismatic despite his treatment and weariness. Born to Scottish parents who had left the rubble of post-World War II Britain, Heather Menzies entered this world in Toronto on December 3, 1949. Her dad was an artist who was looking for a new beginning, but they encountered nothing but trouble in Canada. They were homeless, clinging to a glimmer of hope, and broke. Something that Hollywood couldn't teach Heather was this tough immigrant life. Grit. Heather had already lived in 4 different places across 2 continents by the time she was 14 years old: Florida, London, Miami, and Southern California. The family uprooted and relocated each time her father's artistic career took a nosedive. Quickly, Heather had to adapt to different educational systems, learn new accents, and establish friends. I was so drained. However, her adaptability was shaped by all that uncertainty. Something that would be useful to her later on was her habit of constantly reinventing herself. Heather went to a casting call that would alter the course of her life when she was 14 years old and had no prior experience in the acting industry. For the musical The Sound of Music, hundreds of young women tried out. The majority of them had training, agents, and resumes. Heather possessed something other than the one long-forgotten TV program on her record. She was authentic. Her inherent charisma was striking. Suddenly, she was cast as the lead role of Louisa Von Trapp. There was more to the shoot than just glitzy alpine singing. There was a terrible moment that almost made the film a tragedy. In the rowboat scenario, the vessel went overboard. Kim Carruth, who played Gretel, was 5 years old and co-starred with Heather, but she was unable to swim. Twice she collapsed. Filming was underway. Unfortunately, Julie Andrews had a tumble. Heather remained unfazed as the rest of the crew froze. Without hesitation, she dove toward Kim, rescued her, and kept her alive. Kim became phobic of swimming after ingesting so much water that she became ill. The moment, however, remained in the film. What you see on television is authentic. Heather came to the aid of her co-star. On March 2, 1965, the film The Sound of Music debuted in theaters, and it was an instant smash. It became the highest-grossing film of all time by 1966 and won 5 Oscars. The film grossed $286 million globally from 283 million ticket sales. It was the highest-grossing film in 29 countries. Heather Menzies was gone in an instant. The shy girl from an immigrant household used to be famous all over. Heather, who was just 15 years old, had no desire to be trapped in the past like innocent Louisa. This led her to take a bold action in 1973. Tinder Trap was the name of the spread in which she posed naked for Playboy. The name was a playful homage to her musical heritage, but the meaning was obvious. She had outgrown her childhood. The people were taken aback. 8 years before, she had played the role of the naive adolescent in a movie aimed at families. She was now asserting her independence from her image, regardless of the potential backlash from supporters who continued to identify her as Louisa. In the same year, she had a starring role in a surreal horror flick. Christina, whose father was a mad scientist who turned humans into snakes, was played by her. It had actual snakes in it, was bizarre, and had a small budget. But Heather showed no fear. Her detractors commented on how lovely and attractive she was. Her goal, even in this outlandish part, was to make an impression, not blend in. Her 1977 breakout role was as Jessica Six in the science fiction series Logan's Run, set in a universe where the average age of a hunter is 30. Despite the show's brief run of 14 episodes, Heather stood out due to her provocative outfit and defiant personality. Executives at CBS were concerned that she appeared too risque for a kids' program at one point. Heather refused to budge, even after her ensemble was reworked to include pink briefs and tights. Her new identity was this. With her 1978 role in the cult horror smash Piranha, produced by B-movie maestro Roger Corman, she achieved her greatest professional triumph to that point. The movie earned $16 million, while having a budget of just more than $700,000. A lawsuit filed by Universal was subtly abandoned, and even Steven Spielberg gushed about it. Actress Heather portrayed the fearless skip tracer Maggie McEwen. Her performance contributed to Piranha's status as a classic, as she held her own alongside a cast of horror regulars. In a staged hash commercial, Robert Urich and Heather Menzies met while acting out a marital ruse. Seems ridiculous, doesn't it? However, that scene from 1974 altered the course of their lives in an irrevocable way. At the age of 25, Heather Menzies was attempting to put the past of a failed marriage behind her. At 28, Robert Urich was in peak Hollywood form, fit, charismatic, and about to make it big. They were acting out a typical Libby's commercial as a married couple when it all came together. It was more than just acting. The connection was so genuine that it persisted long after the cameras had ceased recording. That one day, acting as if you were in love developed into something more serious very fast. The work was more than that. A love story was beginning. For a period of 27 years. Robert was also not an actor who was suffering. On the brink of fame, he stood. After only 1 year, in 1975, SW8 became a national phenomenon and catapulted him to stardom. Fans adored him for his portrayal of the heroic yet gruff cop, Officer Jim Street. There was a deliberate plan behind everything. Robert put forth a lot of time and effort to change his image. He went from 180 to 220 pounds of muscle solely to conform to the action hero stereotype. He was well-liked, charismatic, and had the perfect circle of friends. Even Burt Reynolds, one of them, was instrumental in securing his breakthrough role. Producer Aaron Spelling was persuaded to give Robert a chance by Reynolds. The deal was sealed after Spelling's audition. In an instant, Robert Urich was en route. At the same time, Heather was experiencing a watershed moment in her life. She had once had immense fame. In the legendary film The Sound of Music, she portrayed the role of Louisa Von Trapp at the tender age of 15. However, the days of becoming a child star are over. When she met Robert, she was already in the midst of her challenging transition from child star to serious actress. Additionally, she was getting over a 4-year marriage that she entered at the tender age of 21. Additionally, Robert had previously tied the knot with Barbara Rucker, his college sweetheart. He was wary after that marriage, which ended peacefully. He married Heather a little over a year after they met, which was shocking and perhaps even reckless in hindsight. On November 21, 1975, they exchanged wedding vows. Fast? Sure thing. However, the consensus among those who knew them was unanimous. It seemed correct. Just a few weeks after meeting Heather, Robert informed his pals that he knew she was the one. This was no Hollywood platitude. I could feel it. It wasn't a fling, yet their romance burned brightly. Such a bond doesn't materialize very frequently, particularly in the entertainment industry. They were an unusual couple. They became a real power couple in Hollywood who didn't require drama. A cinematic legacy was Heather's. Robert had just become a TV celebrity. In 1978, he was nominated for 2 Golden Globes for his leading part in the 3-year crime drama Vagath, which he had landed by then. That's when they both became famous, and not only individually. Visual artists adored them. It wasn't merely their attractiveness as a couple that led to their appearance on magazine covers. It was in their gazes that it was apparent. Brands weren't being sold. Their love was pure and simple. Robert certainly made no secret of the fact. He made an effort to include Heather in his life from the start. She made an appearance in 3 Vega episodes. He eventually landed her a role in Spenser for Hire. However, it was more than that. Sharing his life was the main focus. He achieved success because of them. Robert was totally on board with Heather's decision to put her family first and take a break from acting. This level of backing is practically unprecedented in a field where egos rule. After Heather and her husband were married in 1975, she learned she was expecting a child. Despite their lack of effort, the news brought immense joy to her and Robert. Heather reflected on the experience and remarked, "We were over the moon." However, their joy was short-lived. The baby was lost to her. And the pain didn't end there. It was too much to bear. Heather experienced multiple miscarriages. In a row, 3 pregnancies ended in miscarriages. More and more, each one ripped at them. A pattern of loss replaced what had been optimism. The couple's emotional toll became so great that friends started to fear they wouldn't make it. They were both experiencing meteoric rises in their respective fields while this was happening. Behind the scenes, their world was crumbling, even as they lived it up in Hollywood. It became clear that action was required following the 3rd miscarriage. Heather and Robert had to make a tough choice. Adoption took time to resolve. They endured a lengthy procedure that included being added to a waiting list. But in 1978, after much waiting, they finally welcomed their first child, Ryan. After that, in 1980, Emily arrived, then Allison, a long time later, in 1998. 20 years. That was deliberate. They aspired to provide each kid the individual care and attention they needed. I became a doctor, Ryan. Zeroed in on infectious illnesses. If I can't help my dad medically, then maybe I can help someone else, he once stated, which is why he became a doctor. As a nurse, Emily is now employed in an emergency room in Ontario. Perhaps inspired by seeing their father struggle so mightily for his life, each of his children eventually discovered a way to recover. Heather sacrificed in her own unique way. She was a celebrity on the rise. Jessica Six as Logan's Run and Louisa in The Sound of Music. Being famous and busy, she had a full schedule. However, she withdrew when they adopted. Hollywood was surprised when women left in such a dramatic fashion. Yet, she accomplished it. She starred in a handful of films after 1979. Apart from a few episodes of Vega, an appearance on T.J. Hooker, and the film Endangered Species, I haven't done anything. She traded it in so she could provide a secure home for her children. Robert was also an outlier. A father like him wouldn't leave his children in the care of nannies so he could focus on his career. In spite of his hectic schedule, he appeared in 15 shows throughout his 30-year career. He always made time to attend. Spenser, for Hire, was able to take Emily across the nation for her medical appointments according to a provision in his contract. In the 1980s, that was extremely unusual, if not unheard of. His parenting style was all about building relationships, not merely making an appearance. Robert kept his cool when Ryan acted out. He knelt down next to him on the floor and inquired about the situation. His goal was comprehension, not retribution. Robert continued to play on the floor with his youngest daughter, Allison, in the days leading up to his death, even though the disease had sapped almost all of his strength. However, August 1996 was the turning point. Robert walked in for his routine exam, but something caught the physician's attention. Synovial sarcoma is an aggressive and uncommon cancer that develops in the soft tissues around the joints. It primarily affects individuals younger than 30. Rob was 49 years old. He was unwell with cancer in his groin. A severe punishment would be inflicted. Biological treatments, including chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery. It was the worst possible time. His new series, The Lazarus Man, had just premiered, and he was feeling better than he had in a long time. Hollywood was rocked by the diagnosis. Things were going swimmingly for the show, and production has already begun on Season 2. Although Castle Rock Entertainment did not cancel the show until weeks after the news broke, everyone was taken aback by the choice. Out of the 22 episodes, only 20 had been telecast. There were 2 completed episodes that were put aside. It was already shocking that TNT had decided to renew the show, so the cancellation was much more shocking. His 6-month ordeal with radiation and chemotherapy began in July 1996. At 5:45 a.m. every morning, he would report to the hospital, where he would be injected with potassium, bicarbonate, and anti-nausea medications before to the commencement of his punishment. Every 9 days, patients had chemotherapy for 4 hours. Robert reported that by the end of the 6th day, the pool chemicals were pulsating through his body. The discomfort and nausea persisted no matter what he did to divert his attention. The radiation was considerably stronger. While attempting to save the rest of his body, they directed tens of millions of rads, a radiation dose thousands times stronger than that of a standard X-ray, at the cancer in his groin using lead templates. He was completely bald by February 1997. His illness persisted, and he struggled to breathe. Combating cancer wasn't his only challenge. As the remedy took effect, he fought for his life. After that, an extraordinary event transpired. The remaining tumor was surgically removed in October 1997. However, upon opening him, they discovered nothing. Absolutely no malignancy, necrotic tissue, or tumor. The illness seems to have vanished. The news shocked Robert. I began to question whether I had ever experienced it, he added. According to the doctors, his chances of relapse are 5%. A glimmer of hope had not been seen in years. Cancer was deemed eradicated from Robert's body by 1998. He took on the role of American Cancer Society spokesperson on a national level. He informed everyone that spreading the information that illness is survivable is part of his agreement with God. Once again, he began to labor. 2 years after joining the cast of Love Boat, The Next Wave, he finally achieved his goal. It seemed like the worst was behind me when I performed as Billy Flynn in Chicago on Broadway. Heather and Robert felt they had triumphed against all obstacles. Doctors had assured them of a 95% cure rate, so they began making preparations for the future. After winning $125,000 on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, he gave all of it to the fight against cancer. Together with Heather, he established the Urich Fund to bolster sarcoma research. He went around the nation urging people to get checked as soon as possible. An Extraordinary Life, his autobiography, was even in the works. It appeared like the story might finally conclude with victory, but alas, it did not. Cancer made a triumphant comeback in November 2001. There were new growths. The medical community first misjudged the efficacy of a new medication. This outbreak of the disease was significantly more severe, swift, and violent than the last. There was a localized origin to the tumor. It seemed to have gone global. There was no longer any hope for a surgical repair or a recovery. Robert had recently wrapped up production on his last program, the NBC comedy Emerald. The final attack of the disease put an end to his acting career. He thought he and Heather were safe. Everything was falling apart again after they had restored their lives. But this time, the ending was already in their heads. Los Robles Regional Medical Center in California was the site of Robert Urich's passing on April 16, 2002, at 7:22 p.m. The man was 55 years old. Adopted children Ryan, 24, Emily, 22, and Allison, 4 years old, were with him. Heather was also there. A few days prior to this, he had been admitted to the hospital due to breathing difficulties. Attempting to create a lasting legacy, he continued to write on his memoirs even in his last weeks. The national television premiere of his last film, Night of the Wolf, took place the night before he passed away. Heather became a widow at the age of 52. They were 27 years into their marriage. She had been by his side for all of his medical procedures, chemotherapy treatments, and anxious moments. Miscarriage had taken the lives of their children. Through adoption, they had created a family. The world was now her enemy, and she was on her own. Her strength was equal to her immense anguish. Nearly 1,000 mourners gathered at North Hollywood's St. Charles Borromeo Church 3 days later. Stars such as Gavin MacLeod, Tony Danza, and Tom Selleck were in attendance to offer their respects. The news is tragic because of Bob's character, Selleck told reporters. This type of person only comes out in genuine friendships. Robert stood outside in a black and white shot, surrounded by flowers. His passing did not prevent the public from remembering the guy who had broken the record for most television series appearances by a single actor. Heather persisted. Their friendship began long before Robert's death. She took it to a new level, though. It was she who established the Robert Urich Foundation. She preferred a more active role, increasing the number of events, raising awareness, and funding research. She expressed her enthusiasm in spearheading the foundation. It's extremely similar to all the wonderful days I've had with Robert. Their offspring were brought up by her. She continued to labor. She found meaning in her suffering. Heather Menzies Urich, who had a starring role in The Sound of Music as Louisa Von Trapp, was diagnosed with glioblastoma multiforme in November 2017. This brain cancer is among the most aggressive and fatal ones now known to medicine. Was 68 years old, and the worst aspect? Her spouse, actor Robert Urich, died of cancer in 2002, and this occurred precisely 15 years after his death. Heather had devoted herself to the fight against cancer for the past 15 years. To ensure that no other family had to go through what hers had, she raised funds and provided assistance to patients via the Robert Urich Foundation. But the moment had come for her. She was now in the path of the illness she had been battling. Only 4 weeks before she passed away, she was diagnosed. Preparation and lengthy farewells were both cut short due to time constraints. For 6 years, Robert fought cancer. He bought them time and hope via his struggle. The inverse was true of Heather's fall. There is no time for glioblastoma. It travels quickly and takes less time overall. According to her son Ryan Urich, who spoke to reporters, her condition deteriorated rapidly following the diagnosis. No last-minute clinical trials or treatment windows were available. There was no way to coordinate the assistance she had devoted her life to providing to others. It was particularly painful to see for people who were close to her. It was more than that for Heather. Being a mother and a ballerina, she embraced life to the fullest. Her voice became softer, her vitality dwindled, and she disappeared in the span of a few days. Even those Hollywood friends who had known her for decades were hardly given an opportunity to bid her farewell. December 24th was the day she passed away. At precisely 7:22 p.m. on December 24th, 2017. There were her 3 children waiting for her at the Frankfort, Ontario, family home. She was not in agony, Ryan subsequently claimed. She finally gave up after resisting for over 4 weeks. At the same time, the location seemed symbolic and serene. Family, comfort, and the promise of a better future are the hallmarks of Christmas Eve. However, for them, it became the turning point at which she was irretrievably gone. A spectral reminder of Robert's demise lingered in the air. April 16, 2002 was the date of his death. Heather left this world precisely 15 years and 8 months after that. More anguish was on the way, and no one had missed the symmetry in their losses. Another member of the Sound of Music family, Charmian Carr, who played Liesl, passed away in September 2016, a little over a year ago. Here we were again, without a Von Trapp sister. It crushed the hearts of moviegoers. The young girl who had previously performed So Long Farewell had now taken her last bow. Ryan spoke from the heart in his statement. His announcement of her death was more than that. He recounted the events in detail, even down to the precise hour. He assured everyone that his mom was well. However, she was able to let go when the time came after experiencing life to the fullest. It was her decision. Without fear or fight, she took her last breath with dignity. Ryan additionally ensured that her genuine identity was known. Everyone, not only Louisa Von Trapp. She opted to devote her life helping people after having a successful career as a dancer, actress, and fighter. That elegance remained with her right up until the very end.